UPN 9 News continues.
The outrage of apartheid in South Africa is over, thanks in part to pressure from the rest of the world. But what if we told you there was a far greater injustice, an oppression that has gone on for centuries and continues, covered up and ignored?
And Laverne, it has gone on for a long time, despite the efforts of many people. What if we told you we had the proof, exclusive videotape and eyewitness testimony? Tonight, that and more, thanks to a scholar at Columbia University who got tired of proving his case on paper. He decided to go see for himself. Now he's back with the evidence for all the world to see: modern slavery. This man can be bought and sold. He is property. So is this woman and her infant son, and tens of thousands more just like them. This is 1996, and these are slaves.
Everyone on this couch, everyone from the leaders to him, were all born in slavery.
These are Mauritanians in Northwest Africa. Here, even for the free, life is hard. Traveling undercover, journalist and human rights activist Sam Cotton shot this home video earlier this month documenting slavery in Mauritania. He is sharing the tape exclusively with UPN 9 News.
I spoke to freed slaves who are helping other slaves now. And I've spoken to runaway slaves. And I've interviewed slaves who are actually in the employment of their master.
Abraham Lincoln freed slaves in the South in 1863 with the Emancipation Proclamation. Today, more than 130 years later, human rights activists are fighting to accomplish the same thing, this time in Africa. Cotton and other experts say there may be more than 90,000 people enslaved in Mauritania.
These people belong to another man, to do his will from morning to night, whether it's physical, whether it's sexual, whether it's economic. They have no future, they have no hope.
New Jersey Congressman Donald Payne has taken an interest in the plight of Mauritanian slaves, questioning their government about the practice.
They say it's become a part of the custom that poor families would simply live with the wealthier people in Mauritania, and they work for no salaries. They're provided some very flimsy type of shelter and food, and they're simply indentured servants.
The Mauritania leaders tell Payne they're working to end the practice.
They say that they are trying, but to date, I have not been convinced.
This woman ran away from her owner, leaving a daughter behind. This woman was also forced to leave her children to escape slavery. She's now married with another child. At any time, her old master could recapture her or help himself to her baby. This woman is now free, but the price was high. Her master let her go when her hands could no longer do more work.
She was tortured by her master. That's why her hands look like that. He hung her in the center of the tent because she let an animal was eaten during her watch. And he hung her there for a long period of time. She was 7 years old when this happened.
Cotton obtained this legal document in Mauritania, written in Arabic and approved by a judge. It's a bill of sale for this woman and her daughter. The price, $40.
It is like going back in time. It's a very frightening experience for me because just 3 generations ago, I was owned by someone.
All the people who appear in Sam Cotton's video do so at the risk of their own lives. The government of Mauritania denies that slavery exists, and it would not be happy to be contradicted.
The slave owners are all Arabs. These are white Arabs who have enslaved black Africans. It gets a little bit thicker too because these are Muslims. Everyone in that country are Muslim, and white Muslims are enslaving the black Muslims. But because black Muslims are considered as animals in that country and subhuman, then they don't have a conscience about doing that, just like white Christians years ago could enslave black Christians because of how they felt they were, or the level they lived at.
Sam Cotton agrees that slaves are no longer sold openly. He says they're bred, change hands quietly in individual sales, as gifts to pay gambling debts, or may even be rented.
It's 1 million square miles, that country, and many of the slaves, the majority, are concentrated and moving with nomadic tribes who have huge herds that they tend, and they're in such movement that it's very difficult for you to pin them down. But if the government was interested, it could pin them down and free these people.
All the freed and runaway slaves in our story remain in Mauritania. Some are in the care of a well-organized underground railroad. Others are becoming politically active. Tomorrow we expose more modern slavery with exclusive pictures of men actually being captured and disturbing evidence that slavery is not confined to Mauritania. Well, men and women, even children in chains. Tonight we continue exposing the truth about modern slavery. Last night we showed you how one man's outrage led him on a dangerous undercover mission and how he brought back proof that institutional slavery has far from vanished. Tonight we submit more evidence showing that the injustice runs deep in parts of Africa.
There's the feeling of anger. And there's the feeling that the past is the present and the present is the past. And that a slave trade that I thought had been wiped out still exists.
This is the face of slavery today. These never-before-published pictures were shot in Sudan, in northeast Africa, this summer by a French photojournalist. UPN 9 News obtained them exclusively. They show slaves being rounded up, hands tied behind their backs, and herded away.
Individuals can supply ample evidence to anyone that goes over there that slavery's there.
In our first report, we talked to journalist and human rights activist Sam Cotton, just back from an undercover fact-finding visit to Africa. And we showed you exclusively his video evidence that men, women, and children are still enslaved in Mauritania in northwest Africa.
A man owns another man, woman, or child. He buys them for a price, or if he has the slave already, he can breed the slave.
Jemera Rone of Human Rights Watch can testify that Mauritania isn't the only place where people are owned. This spring, she investigated human rights abuses in Sudan. Sudan has been fighting a civil war for almost a decade. The rebel power base is in the south, where the Dinka tribe is centered. Jemera Rone says the government is sending soldiers and armed Arab militias to raid Dinka villages, taking animals and people as war booty.
Raiders are very anxious to get their hands on cattle, grain, and incidentally women and children, because they are more malleable than the men and can be beaten into servitude much more readily than the men.
Captured Dinka people are openly taken back to the capital city, Khartoum, or elsewhere in the north, often by airliner.
They are not sneaking them back at all. It's done in plain view. And that's why I say if the government of Sudan were to take it seriously, this is a violation of kidnapping. They don't have a law against slavery, but they do have a law against kidnapping. They could very well enforce it, but they don't care.
It's really poisoning the soul of the country.
Suliman Baldo left his native Sudan 5 months ago after years of human rights activism. Now he's joined Human Rights Watch.
The people who practice enslavement are very poor villagers against other very poor villagers. They take captives, women, children, back to their own villages and use them in domestic slavery. That's to say, in everyday services in the house, to tend fields or to look after hares.
During Jemera Rone's recent visit, she met secretly with 3 former slaves. Now teenagers, they'd been captured when they were as young as 6 years old.
The children that I talked to definitely were beaten when they didn't perform the tasks that they were given. And they were given not only household labor, that is from morning to night, cleaning, washing, carrying water, and other tasks like that. They were also, as they got a little bigger, given the task of watching the herds, either the goats or the sheep or whatever. And if they lost any of them, they would be very severely beaten.
Half a world away from Sudan and Mauritania, right here in Newark, New Jersey, the slaves in Africa may have found a friend. A man whose voice could prove to be a powerful cry for freedom.
It's astounding.
Congressman Donald Payne wants the human bondage to end.
A situation in 1996 moving into the 21st century where conditions of slavery still exist is really unbelievable.
He admits the U.S. has little leverage in Sudan. It's considered a terrorist nation, a hotspot for Islamic fundamentalism. We've broken off all diplomatic and trade relations. It gets no U.S. aid.
But in Mauritania, there has been meetings with their authorities in my office where I challenge them to prove that slavery does not exist anymore. They say it's not state sanctioned, but it still occurs, and they're trying to weed it out.
It's outrageous, it's appalling, and we as Americans should do everything we can to stop it.
And New Jersey Congressman Dick Zimmer has written legislation that will block U.S. aid to Mauritania until they end slavery.
And it's time that we in the United States, as the leading free nation in the world, step in and officially say that we'll have no truck with any country that exercises slavery.
As the country that talks about justice and talks about the dignity of man, I believe that we have to become more vocal and more involved.
It's haunting to look into the eyes of a slave. And human rights activists such as Sam Cotton say the only hope for ending slavery in Africa is for Americans to get angry.
Sometimes I felt guilty because they look at Americans with almost a messianic view of us. You're Americans. You know what freedom is. Martin Luther King, Jesse Jackson, John F. Kennedy. And so they think that Americans embody everything that's moral, and if Americans knew, they wouldn't let the slavery would exist. They stopped it in their country. Yeah, that's right. I just hope that their belief in Americans is warranted.
Do you think it is?
I think the jury's out on that right now.
We contacted the Mauritanian and Sudanese missions to the United Nations in New York. We wanted them to respond to what we discovered about their slavery in their countries, but neither government responded to our calls.